Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today and welcome to this webinar. DVAM is 365 days long, how to raise awareness of domestic violence during and beyond October. My name is Suzanne Green and I'm the Outcomes and Outreach Coordinator for NCADV. And I'm joined today by Pat Silvala, Business Manager for NCADV. Take a moment to locate the questions box in your control panel. A copy of the PowerPoint and all handouts can be found in the control panel under handouts. This webinar is being recorded. We will send it to you along with all handouts in a follow-up email. If you have a question for any of the panelists on today's webinar, please submit anytime via the questions box. During the presentation today, we will have a few poll questions from our presenters. So to introduce our presenters for today, Lynn Brewer is the Communications Director for the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence. She has been an early adopter of social media since the days of Friendster in 2004 and passionate about its potential for organizations and grassroots campaigns since 2008. Lynn received her BA from Kalamazoo College in 2005 and her MFA in writing in 2007. When she's not working at NCADV, she's either working on her literary magazine, one of her novels, or watching Disney movies with her 3 cats. Joe Ostrander coordinates the communications, branding, and marketing of NRCDV's multiple initiatives and special projects. He works with all of the NRCDV teams to ensure consistency of information, projects, messaging, and promotion. Joel holds a BA in Communications, Public Relations from Kutztown University and an MA in Corporate Communications from Duquesne University. He lives in Harrisburg, PA with his wife, 2 daughters, 2 cats, a hamster, a couple of hermit crabs, and a school of fish. Cassie Edmondson Munoz is the Communications and Design Coordinator at Casa de Esperanza. With an AAS degree in graphic design from Minneapolis College and a BA degree in Spanish and Portuguese studies from the University of Minnesota, Cassie's experience ranges from event and travel planning to print design and creative content making. When she's not busy designing, you can find Cassie at soccer games, spending time with her 3 awesome kids, or perfecting a cupcake recipe. Rachel Graber is the Director of Public Policy at the National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, amplifying the voices of victims, survivors, and advocates at the nation's capital. In this position, she has both organized and participated in numerous congressional briefings about domestic violence, and she has been instrumental in the development and passage of important legislation to protect survivors, to provide services, and to keep firearms out of the hands of abusers. She is the co-chair of the National Task Force to End Sexual and Domestic Violences Firearms Subcommittee, the co-chair of the NTF's Outreach Committee, and is an active participant in many other areas of domestic violence-related and intersectional public policy. She was also the creative force behind Disarm Domestic Violence, an interactive website to help survivors, advocates, lawyers, lawmakers, and others understand state laws governing firearm possession by respondents to protective orders. Prior to joining NCADV, Rachel was a junior-senior high school guidance counselor in rural Iowa. Rachel holds a Master's of Social Work degree and a Master's of School Counseling with an endorsement in Gifted Education from the University of Iowa, and is a graduate of Grinnell College. At this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Lynn. Good afternoon, Lynn.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Suzanne. And thank you for everyone. Are we going to have some polls this afternoon?
We are. We're going to have a couple polls.
So I believe our first poll question of this webinar is, have you heard of the Survivor Speaks hashtag? Please select yes or no.
We'll give just a couple minutes for everybody to answer this quick poll question. All right, let's see the results.
Wonderful. So about 1/3 of you have heard of the Survivor Speaks hashtag before, and about 2/3 of you, this is the first time that you're being introduced to it. That's wonderful information, and I'm so glad that you're on the webinar today. I think we have one more poll question. And have you ever engaged with Survivor Speaks yourself? So if you have heard of it, have you used it? Have you retweeted it? Have you replied to it? And we'll give folks just a couple minutes. And the results are 7% of you have, which makes me really happy because everybody's going to hear about the Survivor Speaks campaign. And by the end of this, you're going to know what's in the Survivor Speaks campaign toolkit, as well as how to get a copy of it for yourself. So I'm really excited to be here today, and thank you to everyone for participating in those polls. Because as we all know, when a survivor speaks, it's powerful. So a little bit of background on the Survivor Speaks hashtag. Survivor Speaks is a survivor-centric empowerment hashtag that NCADV created in 2016 to allow survivors of domestic violence to speak out on the realities they experience on a day-to-day basis. We know there are so many myths about DV that still permeate our culture today. And we thought it was important to open up a digital space where survivors could confront these myths head on and respond with their own stories. Of course, a year later, Me Too exploded into the public's consciousness. And what we noticed as time went on was that people using Me Too to talk about domestic violence were being left behind not only in the conversations online, but were essentially ignored by the media. So we decided to reposition Survivor Speaks as the domestic violence specific response to Me Too, to give those survivors space to share their stories. Now, you may have heard of another DV-based hashtag that predates both Survivor Speaks and Me Too, which is the Why I Stayed hashtag Bev Gooden started in 2014. Survivor Speaks and Why I Stayed are distinctly different. While Why I Stayed focuses on answering the most asked question of survivors, which is, well, why didn't you leave? Survivor Speaks is more holistic in its scope. So someone can use the Survivor Speaks hashtag to talk about any moment that occurred during the abuse, and that can include after leaving the abuser. So it's a little less than 2 years since Me Too, and Survivor Speaks has been steadily getting noticed. It consistently outperforms other NCADV campaigns on social media, as well as our overall engagement rate, meaning Survivor Speaks posts perform better than any other content we share. Last year, our blog post responding to Me Too and the need for a DV-specific hashtag was our third most read blog post of 2018. And we've seen media coverage for the hashtag as well, including in the New York Times. So for DVAM, NCADV is providing a toolkit to help you use the Survivor Speaks hashtag. And this is exactly what you'll find in the toolkit. Online resources, sample social posts, shareable graphics from our DV Facts campaign, suggestions for a campaign during DVAM, and more ways to get involved with NCADV. So let's examine the first 3 of these together. Online resources are available to help you use this toolkit both online and offline. You can connect with us on social media, visit our website to find relevant statistics and blog posts to share, a Twibbon you can add to your Twitter avatar, and printable placards that you can download before customizing if you wish, and then printing them out and taking a picture of yourself with it. These work great if you're planning any live events during the month of October or beyond. Sample social posts are just that, examples. So feel free to take any of the provided sample posts and customize them for your organization or brand for any time of year, and you can show your support for raising awareness of domestic violence. There's more than 24 graphics from our DV Facts campaign that you can download and share. Now, DV Facts is a hashtag that we use to raise awareness and educate people about domestic violence statistics. I'll be talking more about the DVFAX campaign next month at the closing plenary session during Voices in Action, NCADV's 18th National Conference on Domestic Violence. Registration closes tomorrow. So there's something I do want to mention regarding this toolkit, and that's how you can use it in two different ways, depending on where you are in your journey as a survivor. We know that it takes a lot of vulnerability to share your story, and that's not a place that every survivor reaches, and we're very mindful of that. So for survivors who are safe and feel ready to share your experiences of domestic violence, we invite you to tell that story as much or as little as you're comfortable with using the Survivor Speaks hashtag. For survivors who are either still seeking safety or just aren't ready to share your story, we'd love for you to still participate by using the DVFAX and other awareness-raising tools provided. So here's how you can get your copy of the Survivor Speaks Toolkit. Go to ncadv.org/survivorspeaks, download the toolkit, open it, and begin. It's that easy. Thank you so much for your time and attention for my presentation on Survivor Speaks campaign and toolkit. And I believe we have a couple more poll questions for you.
Hi everyone, my name is Joe and I'm with NRCDV. You can see the poll question up in front of you. It's, have you heard about the One Thing campaign? You could answer and we'll get the results, I'm sure, in just a moment here. Oh, well, 22%, that's always good to hear. And the other 78%, you're gonna hear about it in a few minutes. We're gonna share some information with you to see how you can incorporate that into. And I believe there's another poll question too. Yeah. So for the 22% that did hear about it, did you engage in the One Thing campaign last year during DVAM 18? And again, that would be, you know, whether it was through social media, you used it in the messaging or the images or the hashtag in any type of your events that you held, put it on any of your materials or posters. Okay, well, thank you to the 15% that did, and for the 85% that have not. Let's see if we can give you some information and get that number adjusted. So I think it is now my turn, right? Great. Well, thank you to NCADV for inviting me to speak on behalf of NRCDV today. I'm really honored to be part of this and to share space with not just you, but also with the presenters after, particularly with Casa de Esperanza, who's really been such an active and a valuable partner in this whole One Thing campaign that we've done. And thanks to everybody who's listening and watching. I'm excited to see how many people really want to be engaged and get ready for DVAM this year. So I'm gonna try to move my slide forward. For those that are not familiar with the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, or NRCDV, and for our presenters, my slides are not moving forward. If maybe you could do that for me, that would be great. NRCDV is a national resource center providing training and technical assistance, advocacy, resources, and materials on domestic violence and intersecting issues to advocates, coalitions, legislators, survivors, researchers, journalists, and more. We're here to talk about our One Thing campaign. So the One Thing campaign is going crazy now. If I could, I apologize to those who are watching. My slides are moving forward. And here we go. Okay, so the One Thing campaign, what I'm going to talk about today is the One Thing campaign. It is a hashtag that was developed around the messaging last year. And yes, it's going crazy. So this is what we work with. It was developed by the Domestic Violence Awareness Project Advisory Committee. It was put together as a unified message to inspire action. We developed it so that it would be easy to say, easy to remember, and easy to adapt. There's a way for the network as a whole and all of those that are working in the field of domestic violence and intimate partner violence to speak as one. And we did this, again, we put this message together because many people care about the issue of domestic violence, but often don't think that their individual action can really make a difference. And One Thing can show that a simple act of one person can inspire others and can really create a ripple effect that over time will broaden and impact future generations. And I'm not sure why I do have slides to advance, but they're just not advancing for me. So there we go. They're going crazy. So I hope everyone's getting a nice preview. I'm going to try to go back to the first. All right, here we are. So why do we want to do One Thing? At NRCDV, we looked at One Thing under the realm of another campaign that we have been working on, which is awareness plus action equals social change. And during that, as you can see, we look at the awareness of the individual contribution, moving people to action, which inspires thinking, which can lead to real change. We like to focus really on the action part of this equation, which we see as being prevention work. We integrating action steps, no matter how small, are one thing that you can do to build community capacity and leading social change. There are examples such as supporting women and people of color businesses, volunteer drives, youth mentoring, and there's all kinds of more stuff in the handout, which is, I know in the handout section of the thing, but it's this, which is awareness plus action equals social change. What's your one thing? And you could say you can download this in the handout section. Is we really believe that there is power in sharing your one thing. Each of us has a unique story that shapes how we look and interact and are viewed by those around us. We want you to share your story openly and often. And as we saw during last year when this campaign was first kicked off, there were many people who found power in sharing their one thing. And we have just a few examples. Should go to the next slide. Of how people in the organizations adapted one thing for their own story. And this is just a very few number of the some of the ways that people took the one thing message and adapted it to their own personal campaigns, their own personal message. And there were literally tens of thousands of images and posts and messages and stories that were shared last year during DVAM. And that continued throughout the year too, because as this presentation is, DVAM isn't just during October, it's all year long. You can go to the next slide, please. So we hope that you'll take a look at DVAM 2019 and that you'll incorporate one thing into your own messaging. And we've provided hopefully some tools that will make that easier. We developed this action guide similar to what Lynn just talked about with their action guide. And it provides all the materials that we hope that you'll need in order to be able to put the one thing message into place. And the one thing we want to make sure you realize is that we're not asking with this campaign, and I know with Lynn's presentation and her campaign and what Cassie will talk about with CASA, is we're not looking for this to replace messaging campaigns or awareness campaigns that your organization or you as an individual have been doing already. This is here to not replace, but to enhance your story, because it can be personalized. We can all do one thing. You could go to the next slide, that'd be great. If you check out our action guide, it includes templates and tools, images, just as Lynn said. We have, I didn't count the number of images, but I'm sure we have probably 50 or more images that were created, both to be used in print and electronically and through social media. We have social media guides, we have audience development guides, messaging guides, social media posts, examples. There's just a lot of more that can all be found on nrcdv.org/DVAM or nrcdv.org/DVAM. You can go to the next site. At NRCDV, we made sure that the one thing message was part of everything that we do and that we say, both through our social media messages, not just during October, but throughout the year. We try to tie that into all that we say and do. We include images, we include the graphics and the logos within all of our materials. So here's just some examples of other ways that you can make sure that you incorporate stuff into. You put it on your website, through your social media channels. When you go out and do trainings and in-person trainings or community events, special events, we have downloadable things that you can have. You can ask people what's their one thing, and they can write it out. A lot of people posted pictures on that last year. It was a big part of the campaign. And there's just some great ways that you can incorporate one thing into your activities. Next slide, please. And just a few more quick things about using it. When we use one thing, the hashtag, it's the number and not the word, so that we can make sure we track that and incorporate. And the logo also incorporates the hashtag, and we'd like you to add it to all of your DVAM materials. You can put it down the bottom. It doesn't have to take the place of your logo or any other logos you're doing. It just enhances again too. You can find all this information on the DVAP website, which once again is nrcdv.org/DVAM. The next slide is just a little bit of information about how you can get in touch with us. And before I turn it over to the next presenter, I just would like to ask you, what is your one thing? What's the one thing that you're going to do this October for DVAM, or as you prepare for DVAM and throughout the year, to make a difference and to bring some awareness to domestic violence? If you could put your answers in the chat and take a look at them, it'd be great. Thank you. Thanks for your time.
Hi, my name is Cassie. I am the Communications and Design Coordinator at Casa de Esperanza. Like Joe mentioned, I'll be sharing some of the ways that we incorporated the One Thing campaign here at Casa de Esperanza. I'm based in Minnesota, but we do have staff all over the country. So the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about Casa de Esperanza briefly. We are based in St. Paul, Minnesota. We started 37 years ago when 4 brave Latina women did something about the lack of shelter for Latinas experiencing violence. Our local services in Minnesota have grown into 3 main initiatives. Family advocacy, which provides safety and support for those experiencing violence, both in our shelter, El Refugio, the kids go to other shelters to work with Spanish-speaking survivors. Our community engagement initiative is made up of Latinas and allies from the community who are committed to taking action that support the mission of Casa de Esperanza. These community-driven solutions provide leadership development and education to both Latino men and women. We have a youth initiative, which strengthens leadership, public speaking, and presentation skills for youth while providing opportunities and creating safe spaces for Latino youth to explore Latino identity, gender norms, and healthy relationships. Our national initiative, the National Latino Network for Healthy Families and Communities, was designated by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services as the culturally specific resource center on domestic violence in Latino communities. And that operates on 4 main pillars. Our public policy team works out of Washington, D.C., and has a strong presence on the Hill advocating for policy changes. We have an in-house research center where the team produces original research on topics that are relevant for service providers and coalition who want to strengthen their capacity to serve Latinos. Our national training and TA team provides technical assistance to practitioners, law enforcement, service providers, and non-government agencies across the country to increase capacity to provide service. And our communications department, which distributes informational webinars, podcasts, and a weekly newsletter with information for advocates to strengthen their capacity to serve Latinos. We are a member of the Domestic Violence Awareness Project, and we're part of developing the theme. And so what we brought was the Latino lens. So the next slide. So we were provided with the logo and graphics, the One Thing logo and graphics in the Spanish version, which was #UnaCosa. And we knew we wanted to create something as part of the campaign that had a strong visual element, was bilingual, culturally relevant, and addressed the intersectionality of our work, as well as having some sort of interactive or engagement component. When we talked about it, we seemed to naturally hold up one finger. So we decided to emphasize that. So we painted that one finger purple, and we even added some glitter for emphasis. We knew we'd be creating content in Spanish and maybe even Spanglish. We were turning to community members and participants to share their una cosa and what was relevant to them. And so the painted finger actually ended up being just interesting enough to get people curious and easy enough to get them to participate. So in the next slide, what we did on social media. So we created a Facebook frame that folks could add to their profile picture. We also did all of our social media banners for the month of October. We posted 2 to 3 times a week. Each week we focused on a different intersection. So week 1, we introduced the purple finger and DVAM with the Una Cosa campaign. And then week 2, all of our posts related to the intersection with our work in the LGBT communities. We celebrated National Coming Out Day. We also shared simple definitions of gender identities and pronouns in Spanish. Week 3, we focused on having conversations with children about healthy relationships, and we kind of incorporated our Decimos No Mas toolkit with that. Week 4, we talked about engaging men, and then we linked that with our Te Invito toolkit on engaging men in domestic violence prevention. So in person, the next slide, what we did in person was we had some impromptu photo shoots with our staff and other participants who regularly meet at our office for other activities. We created like half sheets of paper to capture people's one thing or una cosa, and then they just dipped their finger in some paint and we took some pictures. Half of these took place in September, so we could have some images ready for October. The youth actually decided to kind of clean their painted fingers off in the shape of a awareness ribbon. So you can see that image on the slide. So that was kind of a neat capture of kind of the collective power of everyone's one thing filled in this image. Our community engagement team actually took this activity to some resource fairs and events they had throughout the month of October to encourage the community to talk about it. I mean, and people were drawn to this simple activity, and it involved paint, so children loved it. So for the next slide, you can see some of the results of that. So I do have a background in graphic design, but there are some really easy ways to create graphics like this. A good one that many people use is Canva, where you can actually upload your own image and put text on top of it. I've also heard good things about Adobe Spark, which if someone in your organization already has Adobe Creative Suite, I believe they have access to Adobe Spark, which is easy to use. And most of these images are actually available, as Joe mentioned, on the NRCDV page. We shared some of the Spanish content and the intersection content is all available there. So Towards the end of October, we had a group of youth and their parents who regularly met as part of a local arts programming, and they decided to work with us to put together a video, which we were going to use for Minnesota's kind of Day of Giving that happens in November. So they wanted to film by the altar for Dia de los Muertos and share their one thing. So we actually did a super DIY setup. We had some lights that we got at Home Depot, and then we put like a frosted shower curtain in front of them to create a soft lighting. And we used a really old digital camera that had video capabilities. And now that I think about it, iPhones will probably capture video better now than that camera did. You could use iMovie, which is a free app you can have on your phone if you don't have a Mac, to do any editing. But it was really neat to see how everyone was excited and engaged in creating this video. And there's also tons of tutorials on YouTube about editing videos or creating DIY setups for doing videos as well. So yeah, I wanted to share that's what we did. We look forward to participating more in this year's campaign and taking one thing beyond. So I also have some contact information if you want to follow Casa de Esperanza social media or keep in touch. So there you go. Thank you very much.
Hi, thanks Cassie, and thank you guys everybody for joining us. I'm going to talk a little bit today about legislative advocacy. So I'm going to actually start talking first about specific legislation, and then after that, talking a little bit about how to get involved and what you can do. I also just want to say really quickly the things that we're going to be talking about today. This is legislation that has been developed by experts here in Washington, D.C. and around the country based on feedback from constituents, so based on feedback from domestic violence programs, from victims and survivors, from researchers, and from other people. And we develop all these, the legislation actually with a large number of other organizations, including, of course, Casa de Esperanza and the National Resource Center on Domestic Violence, so our partners here today. So just to start out with, you know, it's really important to remember, you know, how much power you have. Your elected officials work for you. You are a constituent. You are a voter. They're accountable to you because they have their job because of their constituents. But in order to best represent their constituents, they actually need to know what their constituents want, and also what's going on in the ground, what's going on in their communities. That is a really powerful tool, sharing that local information, that information that you have and that they don't. You may or may not know who your legislators are. If you don't know who your legislators are, you can go to senate.gov and to house.gov and just put in your state, and for house.gov your zip code, and that will provide information not only as to who your senators and representatives are, but also how to contact them. I'm here in Washington, D.C., and I primarily engage at the federal level, so I can't tell you quite as much about what's happening in your state. But you know, here in Washington, D.C., you don't have the same kind of direct access that you do in the state legislatures. So it's always really important also not only to get involved here in DC, but also at the state level. So if you go to your state legislature's website, you should be able to find who your members of the legislature are. Please forward slide. Thanks. I do want to say before we get started that October is a really long way away. You know, sometimes here in DC, legislation moves really, really slowly at a glacial, painful pace. And then sometimes it just takes off and it's a whirlwind and it just zooms ahead. And so what we're talking about today, you know, the legislation is probably going to be the same, but what we're asking you to do might change just depending on what happens between now and DVAM. But we will keep you updated. And I'll just talk a little bit at the end about signing up for our action alerts. Forward slide, please. So there are two primary pieces of legislation that we're really focusing on right now. And they are two of the three pillars of the federal government's response to domestic violence. One is the Violence Against Women Act. Probably a lot of you are very familiar with it. It was first passed in 1994 as part of the crime bill. And over the years, it's really transformed. Initially, when it started, it really was focused really heavily on law enforcement, on the criminal justice system, and the law enforcement and prosecution response. And over the years, it's actually transformed into something much more holistic. So it talks not only about, there's no mandatory arrest anymore, and it really looks at engaging other systems, not just the criminal justice system. So the most recent iteration of VAWA, which was passed in 2013, it expired. I think this is an old version. There was a correction, so I apologize for this. It did not expire in February. It expired in December. And just a really quick question or a comment about that, what that means. That doesn't mean that the money has gone away. It's a strange thing that happens here, that an authorization basically is Congress telling itself that it's allowed to spend money, and then appropriations is when you actually spend the money, when Congress actually allocates money for a program. And sometimes Congress, actually very frequently, Congress will allocate money for a program even though it's not authorized, because they know that we're working on reauthorizing it. So they're just giving us some time to do what we need to do. But that only applies to the grant programs. So, for example, there's a special tribal jurisdiction allowing tribes to prosecute non-natives who perpetrate domestic violence on tribal lands. That doesn't go away. Domestic violence is still illegal. That doesn't go away, right? So those provisions that are actually part of the underlying law, those aren't impacted by the authorization status at all. Anyway, so VAWA expired in December, and we've been working for probably the last almost 3 years now with Congress to put together a bill. In April, the House passed that bill, HR 1585, the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2019, with very strong bipartisan support. Right now, we are working with the Senate to develop a companion bill, and we really, our ask is really that it's as similar to HR 1585 as can possibly be. There are some specific provisions that I think are of interest to this audience, and for all audiences, specifically the first one, that not rolling back protections for vulnerable communities. We know that certain communities are impacted differently and have a variety of barriers to seeking safety and seeking services. And so having these protections in place are really, really important to making sure that victims and survivors have access to the safety and security. Something as I think you could tell by my bio that NCADV is specifically interested in is the intersection between domestic violence and firearms. So one of the other things that we really want to see in a Senate bill is dating violence prohibitor, stalking prohibitor, kind of closing some of those loopholes that allow dating abusers to have guns, even though domestic abusers who commit violence against a current or former spouse, cohabitant, someone they share a child in common with, they can't have guns, but dating abusers can, stalkers can. So we're looking at changing or closing some of those loopholes. We're looking at increasing access to safe housing for survivors. We know that one of the primary reasons that victims and survivors can't leave abusive relationships is because they have nowhere to go. About, I think, half of families experiencing homelessness are experiencing homelessness due to domestic violence. And then, obviously, like I said, some communities are impacted differently by domestic violence in other communities. And one of those is Native communities. They experience intimate partner violence at an absurdly high level. and most of that is actually at the hands of non-natives. But because of a really bad court ruling, Supreme Court ruling, tribal governments, tribal courts can't actually prosecute people, non-natives who come onto tribal land and harm Native people. In the last VAWA, that was changed slightly, and the federal government now recognizes tribes' inherent authority to prosecute non-native domestic abusers, but there's a huge gap. It doesn't cover sexual assault, it doesn't cover trafficking, it doesn't cover stalking, it doesn't cover child abuse, it doesn't cover assaults against law enforcement officers. So those are some of those other loopholes that we're looking to close. Please forward slide. Thank you. The other thing that we're really focusing on is the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act, which is one of those really small but mighty programs that funds a lot of shelter activities. And for folks who are here joining us today from a shelter, a lot of you probably get FPSA funding. It expired back in 2015, but like I said, they're continuing to fund it even though it's expired. But we've been working for a while to put together a bill that really meets the needs of victims and survivors and advocates. So in July, Senators Casey and Murkowski introduced S2259, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Improvement Act of 2019. Now, I do want to just say really quickly that there are two Senate bills out there. One is a good Senate bill, one is a bad Senate bill. So S2259, that's the good Senate bill. Please remember that. So S2259, it increases FPSA's authorization. So it says that Congress is allowed to spend more on FPSA than they had been previously. It expands access to FPSA funding. So it authorizes new funding for tribal domestic violence coalitions, underserved programs serving underserved communities, and culturally specific programs. It also kind of changes the formula to make sure that programs that haven't necessarily had access to funding or equitable funding under the formula have access now, but because of the increased authorization amount, it makes sure that it's hold harmless. Nobody's going to see cuts. And it also, one of the big things that we thought about back in 2013, which was actually before my time, but I say me as a general, reference to my colleagues, that we really fought really hard for in 2013 VAWA was provisions to prohibit discrimination against victims and survivors based on sexual orientation or gender identity. A survivor is a survivor is a survivor. No survivor should ever be turned away from shelter and from safety based on sexual orientation or gender identity. That doesn't actually technically apply to FPSA. And so we do want to make sure that survivors have access to FPSA-funded shelters regardless of their sexual orientation or gender identity. Please forward slide. So all of these legislation, there are different places in the House and the Senate. So we have different asks. In the Senate, we're asking people, because there is a Senate FPSA bill, we're asking people to co-sponsor that bill, S2259, not the bad one. We're asking the Senate to pass S2259. And then we're also asking the Senate to introduce and pass a VAWA reauthorization that's similar to the authorization that passed the House, and that contains no rollbacks, no poison pills, does not harm vulnerable communities. In the House, like I said, they've already passed VAWA reauthorization, but there's no bill in the House reauthorizing FPSA. So we are asking the House to introduce a companion bill to the Senate FPSA reauthorization bill, S2259. As far as the state and local legislation, like I said, I don't really keep track of that so much, but your state coalitions generally engage in state legislation. So I would check with them to see how you can get more involved. Please forward slide. So there are a couple different ways to engage. One is social media. I know we've talked a lot about social media earlier in our previous presentations. But social media is one of the quickest and easiest ways to reach lawmakers. It's a lot easier to just for them to just sit down and kind of look at social media to see what their constituents are saying. They don't have to answer a million phone calls or read a million emails. They can just get a really, really quick read on, kind of the temperature and what their constituents are feeling about certain issues. There's actually a poll by the Congressional Management Foundation a while back that found that between 1 and 30 social media posts are as or more effective than 1,000 emails. And and part of that also is that social media posts, depending on how you have your social media settings, they can be seen not only by the people you're posting to, but they can also be seen by other people. And so you're making a very public statement, and that also allows other people to amplify that public statement. So we do definitely recommend that you engage in social media. It's super easy. There is attached in your handouts a VAWA toolkit, and there are a number of social media posts, sample posts in that toolkit for your use. Please forward slide. Thanks. Tweets, Facebook posts. I don't really use the other social media. I'm I guess a little bit of a dinosaur. But engaging in social media, it's really quick, it's really easy, and it's really public. But sometimes you want a more personal touch. For a more personal touch, you can call your lawmakers, you can email them. All of their websites have contact information, including phone number. You can call the DC office, you can call a local office, or you can use their contact form to send an email. And making this connection, it gives you a little opportunity to explain in greater detail why something is important to their community. A tweet, it's, 280 characters now. A Facebook post, it's not going to be more than a paragraph at most. But if you're sending an email, you can really sit down and dig deep into the issue, and not necessarily dig deep into the wonky issue necessarily. Here in DC, we're really deep into the weeds of, VAWA is over 200 pages. We're not expecting you to do that, but really to talk about the experience of people in your community. If you're a survivor, your experience. If you're an advocate, the experience of people that you serve. If you're neither, but you're a really passionate person, tell your legislators why you're so passionate about it, and why it's important to you as a constituent and to your community that they pass this legislation. Like I said, you don't have to know every detail about the legislation. It's really about how it impacts your community. So, and the other thing is, don't forget to tell them what you want when you're making these calls and sending these emails, because it's great to have all that local information, but then they need to know what to do with it. Forward slide, please. Thanks. If you want to kind of excuse me, I'm going to take a quick brief of water. If you want to kind of have kind of the happy medium, both having it be public facing, but also being able to get a little bit deeper into the content and the subject matter, op-eds and letters to the editor is a really great opportunity to share your views with both your members of Congress or elected officials, and also a wider audience. So all of those people who are not going to be on the phone with you when you're talking to an office, but might have an interest and want to know more about the issues. Op-eds, they're usually about 700 words or less. Letters to the editor, usually about 200. Every publication is different, so make sure if you're doing an op-ed or a letter to the editor to make sure that you're you know what the word limits are. These are actually really helpful because they raise awareness about issues, not just for people who care about these issues, but for everyone, and pull in more people who are not really aware of you know, the need for VAWA and PIPSA reauthorization, or really not aware of how domestic violence impacts their communities at all. You know, like I said, as with other, as with calls and emails, it's really important to talk about the impact of domestic violence on your community. And again, make sure that they know what you want. It's great to really get deep into how it impacts people, but they need to know what you want them to do with that information. Please forward slide. And actually, so as far as all of these advocacy tools go, in your handout, the VAWA toolkit, there's information, you know, there are templates and you know, model questions and everything that you need specifically for VAWA. I wasn't able to provide the same thing for PIPSA. You know, another way you can engage with your lawmakers is meeting in person, either with the members of Congress themselves or with their staff. Congress will be home for recess the first 2 weeks of October. So your members of Congress will actually be physically present in your state. You can find town hall meetings and other in-person events at townhallproject.com. Or, you know, you might want to meet one-on-one, so you can set up a meeting with the members of Congress if they're available, or with their staff. That's all on their websites. And, you know, a lot of programs will be holding DVAM events. I bet a lot of the folks here are hard at work planning those. And it's great to invite lawmakers to your DVAM events. You know, I know this is a little bit of a broken record, but it's kind of the same idea. Talk about how domestic violence impacts your community and why it's important to reauthorize VAWA and PIPSA with meaningful changes and improvements. Please forward slide. And that's it from me. You know, one other thing that I would recommend really quickly is if you go to NCADV's website and you click on the link to sign up for newsletters, it gives you the option to sign up specifically for action alerts. And so, as I said, kind of as time goes by, what we're asking you to do in the public policy realm might change just because of what's happening here in DC. And so through those action alerts, we'll keep you updated on what's happening, what we're asking from you, and also providing you with tools to make it easy for you to engage. So thanks, guys.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody, for presenting. We'd like to open it up now for some Q&A time. We have a few minutes left, so now's the time to get those questions in if you have any questions for your presenters today. We do have one for Cassie. Let me find, here we go. The question is, Cassie, is your organization able to assist with the immigration issues at the border currently going on?
That is an excellent question. I know you can reach out to our Director of Public Policy to see what the work that they're doing. Our local initiatives are based in Minnesota, and our national initiatives, again, are staff around the country. But yes, I can look into that and get back to you.
Okay, sounds good. There was also someone that just commented, we're wanting VAWA to be reinstated, correct? That's correct. We want...
Sort of. Yes, but there's always a but. It's not enough for it just to be reauthorized, right? We know that there are needs that are not being met. We know that we really need to make changes and improvements to VAWA, as I was talking about before, kind of listing some of those changes and improvements. So it's not that we want VAWA to be reauthorized at any cost. We want a specific VAWA to be reauthorized. We're not looking for a straight reauthorization. We're not looking to maintain the status quo. We want to improve the nation's response to domestic violence. And VAWA also includes dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking.
Great, thank you for the clarification on that, Rachel. Someone asked about, and I'm not sure if any of the other presenters have heard of this, but it says, have you ever thought of using things like gacha apps to further messages via YouTube to target other, younger audiences on the digital YouTube level? We specifically haven't used that, but I'm not sure if any of the other presenters have worked with that via YouTube.
I have not, no.
Okay, that can be something we can explore. We'll look into it and see about that. This is being recorded. We'll send you a recording with all the handouts after this. You'll probably receive it in the next day or so. Also, is Purple Thursday October 24th this year? Any information on that from you guys? Not sure if that has been, no, we don't have the answer to that, but we'll figure that out, and we'll absolutely, NCADV will send out notifications about when Purple Thursday is this October. The campaigns are amazing. What's a good way to make these campaigns teen friendly? Do you all have any advice on the?
Add emojis and GIFs whenever you can. I see that engaging younger folks more and more. What about Cassie and Joe?
We've actually created Snapchat filters when we've had youth events. So that seems to get them a little more engaged since I feel like that's what they do all the time anyways.
We carried the One Thing campaign all the way through Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month as well too, through February, creating images and messaging around that as well. We participated with some events from other organizations who really take the lead on teen DVAM, including Break the Cycle, and we participated in some of their Snapchat groups and things like that. But we can always do more, right? Because reaching the youth audience is really crucial to advancing the message and keeping it going forward. So.
Absolutely. And Joe, you mentioned Snapchat, which reminded me of an article that I read. There was a campaign that was based in India, and someone created a Snapchat filter that allowed survivors to share their stories without actually being seen. So it was a really interesting thing to do with like survivor privacy and speaking out. And it really attests that this is a global audience that we're reaching these days with these wonderful channels.
Yeah, cool.
Definitely, I'd say Snapchat. We also have our Take a Stand for Healthy.
Yeah, so we have our teen dating curriculum at teens4, and that's the number 4, healthyrelationships.org. That's a website that NCADV launched last year that specifically offers free standard aligned curriculum for middle and high school classes so that they can learn not only what red flags to stop and how to take a stand against that kind of violence, but also how to recognize what's a healthy relationship and what is the positive that we're working towards.
So that's a really good teen dating curriculum that you can find at the ncadv.org website as well. You can find more information. Also, we will have everybody's, I know somebody asked about, how to interact with each of these organizations' websites, and we will have information in the slides, has everybody's organizational website addresses, so you guys can connect with all of us on there. Let me see, we do not have any materials or posters at NCADV translated into Vietnamese. I'm not sure if NRCDV does.
No, we don't.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry, we don't. We do have materials, of course, in Spanish, and we have some in Arab, some materials through the DVAP site in Arabic as well too. But I don't believe we have Vietnamese, although I will double check as we talk. So.
Okay, and we did get a message that October 24th is where Purple Day. Also, you can sign up at ncadv.org to get text alerts and any kind of action alerts through NCADV. So it's www.ncadv.org. And is the teens for?
I'm not sure. It's teens. So someone's asking me to repeat the name of the teen curriculum website. It's teens, and that's plural teens, for the number 4, healthyrelationships.org. And that's where you can find our Take a Stand for Healthy Relationships curriculum.
So it looks like that's about all the questions we have today.
And we're about out of time.
And we're about out of time. So if you all have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to NCADV directly, and we will disseminate questions to our presenters as necessary. Thank you everybody for joining us today and for participation, and thank you to our presenters.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a good afternoon.